Howdy folks, it's your friendly neighborhood developer Trammell Web Dev here, and today we're going to be learning all about web components. Before we get started, I'd like to give a huge thank you to everyone watching. It really means a lot. If you enjoy the video, please feel free to like and subscribe. And with that being said, let's rock and roll. You may be wondering, what is a web component? Well, according to MDN, web components are a suite of different technologies allowing you to create reusable custom elements with their functionality encapsulated away from the rest of your code. The three main features behind web components consist of custom elements, the shadow DOM, and HTML templates. Let's take a look at all three, starting with custom elements. So custom elements are a collection of JavaScript APIs that allow you to define unique HTML elements that you can use within your application. There are two types of custom elements, but in this video, we're going to focus on customized built-in elements that allow you to extend existing HTML elements to inherit some of their characteristics and allow you to build out extra functionality. Let's go ahead and build a custom element that extends the generic HTML element. Alrighty, so I've got a project here. I've added some HTML in. I've got a styles.css that's got some styles we'll utilize throughout the project. And then I've got an empty app.js file. If you're interested in following along, I've linked the repository below, so feel free and clone that, and let's get going. So the first thing that we want to do with our web component is give it a name. And this name is going to be what we actually use when we add it into our HTML file. So this is the name of the tag. So it's important to note that when naming a custom element, you have to use a dash. So I'm going to name mine WC-card. So in order to register the name, we're going to call window.customelements.define, and then we're going to pass in two arguments. The first argument is the name of our component, so WC-card, and then the second argument is the class. Oops. So we haven't actually created this card class yet, but I'm going to go ahead and pass it in anyways. And we'll go ahead and create that right now. So when you are creating the class for your custom element, you're going to be extending either the generic HTML element or another element. So by extending another element, basically you're choosing which properties you want to inherit. If you're trying to do something fancy, like create a new type of list or something like that, you might want to extend the unordered list property or class so that you have some of the properties that are native to that specific tag. So in this instance, I'm going to just extend the generic HTML element. And then since this is a class, we'll go ahead and call our constructor. And finally, we're going to call super. And now super is going to pull in all of the properties and whatnot from our HTML element that we're extending and make it available to us in here. So there's several lifecycle events that happen with custom elements, and you can tap into each one of those into your class. We're going to be tapping into one called connected callback that happens when the element is connected to the page. There's other ones like there's one that lets you listen for attributes on your custom elements. If they change, it'll fire that event. And then there's the other ones just kind of go along the normal life cycle of the element as it enters the page, leaves the page, that sort of thing. So we're going to do connected callback. And then we're also going to add an if statement here, and we're going to just say this dot is connected, because sometimes with web components, connected callback can happen even when the element is removed from the page. So we want to just make sure that our element is still actually on the page before reinitializing everything. So we're going to go ahead and call our initialization script. So I'm just going to call this initialized card. We're going to go down here and we're going to define what initialized card does. So in our initialization script, what we're going to do is we're going to create a couple elements, and then we're going to add some classes, and then we're just going to append everything together. But first, what we need to do is we need to look at our attributes to get our text contents. So when we add our elements onto the page in our index.html file, we're going to give it a couple attributes, and those attributes will store the text that makes up our card. So I'm going to create a couple variables here to kind of store those values. And now I can just use this because this directly references the custom element that we're building. And our card will have a title, a subtitle, and a body. Oh, goodness. Cool. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're just going to create a couple generic elements to kind of hold our content in. Now, earlier I talked about how there were two ways to create a custom element. You can go the way that we're going by, creating a class and registering it with the custom elements, or you could literally do something like this. Document.createElement. Now, this would create kind of a nerfed component, not even a component really. It's just an element that has no properties, nothing. It's just there. So definitely wouldn't suggest doing it this way. I feel like this is the proper way to define a custom element, but we're going to go ahead and create a couple variables to store our actual elements. We're going to use an H3 for our title. Apologies for my slow typing and errors. Okay, so we've got these set. So now let's go ahead and populate our text content and let's add some classes. So for the title, let's start with that. We'll just use text content. Okay, and then we're going to do title.classlist.add, and then we're going to give it the class of card title. Now we're going to repeat that for the rest of our elements here. Okay, so now that our elements all have text, they all have classes, last thing we need to do is we just need to append them to our custom element. So we're just going to say this.append, and then we're going to pass in the elements in the order we want them appended. So title, subtitle, and body. Okay, so that's that. Now our custom element has been created. Now all that's left is to add it into the page. So let's switch over here. We're going to open up a WC card element. And then we need to add our attributes here to define what our text, our title, subtitle, and body is. And then I'm just going to type out some lorem here, click that. Okay, so we have our WC card, we have data title, data subtitle, and data body. Now all that's left is to check it out. So let's open up our live server here. And okay, so we've got it, but something's not quite right. And you know what? That's because I don't actually have my styles.css imported. So that's excellent. Let's save that and let's give that a look-see again. Cool. All right, that looks much better. So yeah, pretty simple style, nothing too fancy. But yeah, we've got a card here, and now we can repeat it if we want to. And we have 2 cards on the page. Now let's go ahead and inspect these and see what it looks like under the hood. So we've got our web component here. We've got our H3 that we created. We've got a P tag and we've got our div. So as you can see, there's really not much to it. We've literally created an HTML tag, and this tag serves as a wrapper for other tags. And yeah, that's it for custom elements. Now that we've learned how to define a custom element, let's take a look at the next feature in the web component suite, the shadow DOM. If you're familiar with the DOM, you'll know that it's a structured collection of nodes and their properties that represent the HTML document. So then what is the shadow DOM? I'm going to drop an analogy on you. Think of the shadow DOM as a window to an alternate reality, with the shadow root being that alternate reality. What happens in the main reality, the DOM, doesn't necessarily affect what happens in the alternate reality, the shadow root. This is due to the encapsulation that the shadow DOM provides. So for example, if I have a global style for my H1 that I apply, that style will not be received in the shadow DOM because my code is completely encapsulated. I can't use a document query selector to find a node within the shadow DOM because it doesn't exist in the normal document. Let's go ahead and hop over to our IDE and see how we can attach a shadow root to our custom element. Cool. So I went ahead and created a custom element here. It's pretty simple. All it does is it prints an H1 onto the page. Nothing fancy. So let's take a look at what that element looks like in the browser. So you'll notice that it's inheriting styles properly. We have lorem ipsum here, and it's got all the proper H1 styles, so everything looks the way it should. Now let's see what happens when we migrate this component to the shadow DOM. So in order to get this component up and running in the shadow DOM, we need to do 2 things. The first thing we need to do is we need to attach the shadow to this instance. So we're going to say this.attach shadow. And then we're going to pass in an argument that's an object, and we're going to specify the mode. Now there are 2 options here. It's either open or closed. We're going to do open, and we'll do closed here in a little bit. But once this happens, we now have access to a property called shadow root, and this is what we use to actually interact with elements within the shadow DOM from outside the shadow DOM. So technically, our custom element exists outside the shadow DOM. It's wrapped around it, right? So it doesn't. It needs some sort of path in order to interact with the shadow DOM. So instead of doing this.append heading, which we still could do, it just wouldn't be in the shadow DOM. We need to now dive a little bit deeper and say this.shadowroot.append heading. And when we do that, we'll save that and go back to our browser. We notice that this looks a little bit different. Now, we talked about how everything is encapsulated in the shadow DOM, which means that it doesn't inherit the CSS from the regular DOM. So you'll notice that we have the shadow root here, and everything that's inside of here is going to be in the shadow DOM. So now some CSS does come through, like you'll see CSS variables are coming through. You can target styles by using the host pseudo class, but generally CSS does not penetrate into the shadow DOM. So we've basically created this new heading component that doesn't care about its surroundings. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, let's say you have multiple websites. They all have their own custom themes, custom styles, and you want to have a chat widget or some sort of universal nav bar or something like that looks consistent on every site. Well, if you were to attach it to the shadow DOM, you would be able to keep the website styles from conflicting with the styles of this component that you're trying to drop in, which makes it a lot more reusable and just generally cleaner. So now let's take a look at what happens if we make this closed. So if I change this to closed, we go back, we're going to see some errors in the console. Notice our component here is not rendering properly, and we have an error in the console, cannot read properties of null. Now, the main difference between open and closed mode is that closed gets rid of this shadow root right here. So you can no longer access the elements via shadow root. You have to actually store a reference to the shadow DOM when you're attaching it. So if I instead do this, now I should be able to access my element properly. So it's back. And you'll notice if we inspect it again, it says shadow root closed. And yeah, that's that. So that is the shadow DOM. There's definitely more that we could go over, but I think that's the general basics. The final piece in our web component suite are HTML templates. So far, we've discussed how web components can be leveraged to create reusable chunks of code to use within your application. HTML templates are especially helpful for repeated elements. This technology allows you to create a predefined, unmounted blueprint, meaning it won't appear on the page, that you can clone and inject when necessary. HTML templates can also be combined with the slot tag to dictate where your content should be dynamically inserted. In the next example, let's use template and slot tags to recreate the card we built earlier on in the video. Okay, so we've got some markup here. We've got our custom element WC card template, and then we have this template tag. Now, the template tag allows you to store HTML without it actually being rendered, which means it's not going to be visible to users when the page loads. It's still there. It's not really targetable. It's kind of waiting to be initialized with JavaScript. So I've basically copied the structure from our first example and pasted it inside a template. And then I created kind of the start of a custom element definition, attached the shadow, created our initialize call. So now all that needs to be done is we need to target this template, and then we need to clone it, and then mount it to our shadow DOM. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and create a variable, and we'll use document.getElementById, and the element was card template. Oh, goodness. And then because we are trying to get the stuff that's inside of the template tag, we actually need to access the content. So inside of the template tag is what's called a document fragment. And in order to get that, we use content. So by accessing this directly, it allows us to kind of copy the nodes that are stored inside of our template tag so that we can clone them. So now we do this .attach, or this .shadow root .append child, and then we're going to say content. Oop, good old autocomplete. Content clone node. I'm going to pass in true. So basically what that does is it copies the content from inside this template, it clones it, so it's not moving it from one place to another, it's literally just creating a copy, and then it's appending it to our shadow root. So now if we go back to our HTML, we should see all of this, the styles, these heading tag, the paragraph tag div should be represented in our card template in the shadow DOM. As you can see, we have just a basic card here with title, subtitle, and body. If we inspect our template, we see this document fragment, and then if we inspect our div, we see our shadow root. So this is great, but how do we get that content to be dynamic? Well, that happens thanks to the slot tag. So what we can do is we can wrap our text in a slot tag, And basically, the text that's going to be in here is going to be the default. So if I don't provide a value when I render my template, then it's just going to render the text in here. If I do provide a value for the slot tag, then it's going to render the value that I've provided. Now, the slot tag takes an attribute called name, and this is the name that we're going to access the slot by. So I'm going to set this to title, and then we'll go ahead and we'll do the same for the rest of our tags. So we've wrapped all of our text in slots. Now the next thing that we need to do is we need to actually add some children to our custom element. So what we're going to do is we're just going to use spans, and we're going to give it a property called, or an attribute called slot. And whatever name we match this with is what gets printed in here. So I'm going to say slot title, and then whatever value I put between this tag is going to get replaced with the value that's inside of my slot tag. So I want this to say hello world. We'll create another span. And we'll add the slot that corresponds with the subtitle. This matches the name directly. Not clock. Okay, so now what happens is that we clone this, and when we mount it to the Shadow DOM, we basically just swap these values for these values. If we now inspect our web page, we'll see I didn't save it. Sorry, folks. Oh, derp. Sorry. Okay, so now we can see our card here. So if we inspect it a little bit, let's see what this looks like. So you'll notice that our shadow root looks good. We have our H3, but we also have the slot tag, and then we have the original spans that we added down. So the slot tags are really great for handling repeatable content. So by creating a template of your markup and then using the slot tag to dynamically insert your content, you can make your HTML a lot more organized. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned a little bit more about web components today. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the chat below. Otherwise, have a wonderful day.